You're listening to the Truth Podcast from PursueGOD.org.
Hey friends, welcome to the last series of the year for the Truth Podcast at PursueGOD.org. Today, we're starting a little Christmas series. We're going to call it The Story of Christmas from the people who were actually there. So we're going to take kind of a fun little deep dive into some of these characters that might seem a little bit peripheral. You probably know a little bit about them from the Christmas story. Today, we're going to look at the Innkeeper. Next week, we'll look at the shepherds. In week 3, we'll look at the wise men and then King Herod. So we're going to sort of look at the story of Christmas through their eyes. And of course, as we always do, we're going to apply the lessons that we learn to our lives today. If you want to use this kind of devotionally with your small group, or maybe even with your family, this might be a good one to do with your family at this Christmas season. I encourage you to do that. You can find the series at PursueGOD.org. This one will be found for the month of December. You can find it right on the front page in our series listing. Now, before I get into today's lesson, I just wanted to take a minute and speak to you about giving at PursueGOD.org. If you've been listening to the podcast throughout the year, if you've been enjoying our content, I wanted to let you know that all of this content is made available to you because of the generous donations of our listeners. If you want to get in the game and support this resource, we make this free to all of our listeners. One of the things that I am just really committed to is not putting ads onto the podcast. You know, I listen to a lot of podcasts throughout the week from other sources. And one of the things that drives me crazy is you listen to a podcast, you're into the content, and then all of a sudden there's some commercial that they throw in there. I get it. I understand that a lot of these organizations or individuals that are putting content out there need to pay the bills. Trust me, I get it. But one of the things that we're really committed to at Pursue God is not interrupting the user experience. We don't want to have to throw in ads, and so we just don't do that. And as a result, we really have to rely on donations from our givers to pay the bills, to pay the staff, to produce this content. And that's where you come in. If you appreciate the content, if you appreciate that we put it all at PursueGOD.org, we put it into series, we make it easy for you to use with your small group or your family or one-on-one mentoring. If you appreciate all that and you're not yet a giver, I just want to invite you to join in and become a giver. Tracy and I are actually pretty big givers to the Pursue God resources. We support this because we believe in it. It's not just something that we love to do. It's not just part of our life's mission, but it's something we believe in. So we think of it kind of like an investment portfolio. Now, there's not a return on the investment for us in this world, but there certainly is a return on the investment for other people who come to faith, people where I love that we get emails from people all around the country, even around the world, who say, I'm using your resources in our church. I'm, either pastor, I'm a small group leader. We love that. We love that we have so many listeners that are benefiting from this. I mean, that is such a reward for us. And that's why we are big givers on a monthly basis to PursueGOD.org. So if you want to join us, whether you want to be a big giver, maybe in the hundreds a month, or maybe for some of you, you're like, I can't afford something like that, but I could give $5 or $10 a month. We really appreciate that kind of giving. You can become a part of that team by going to PursueGOD.org. Click on that that donate tab in the top menu, and it's secure and simple. You can give a one-time gift at the end of the year, or you can become just a regular giver to the resources. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to those who are givers, those of you who are going to become givers. Thanks for that. That means a lot to us. And also, when you give, you'll also be included on our weekly mailing list if you're not already on it. And so you'll get not just end of the year summaries that we're going to be sending out here in a couple of weeks, but also you'll get a regular reminder of what's coming out every week on our podcasts. All right, now let's get to the topic for today. The Christmas story from people who were actually there. Before we get into the story for today, we're going to be in Luke chapter 2, verses 1-7. If you want to turn there, you can do that. But I want to take a few moments to ask a question just to get us started. And here's a question. Are you making room for Jesus in your life? Now, this is a question in general, not just for Christmas time, but I think at Christmas time, this is especially a tough question to answer, because at Christmas, you've always got projects to finish at work. You've got budgets to set for next year, maybe proposals to submit before the end of the year. If you're a student, maybe you've got tests that you're studying for here for the end of the semester. Maybe for you families, you're still planning vacations, travel plans. You got parties to throw, presents to buy, kids' schedules to keep up with. Life can get so busy, especially in December as the holidays come around. And if you think this is just like a December thing or just like a modern day thing, I think you'll be encouraged, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think you'll be encouraged by today's story, because we're going to find out that this is not unique to us, to our time period in our country. This is something that even we see in the Christmas story. Let me show you what I mean. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 1, it says, "At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire." Verse 4, "And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee, and he took with him Mary, to whom he was engaged, who was now expecting a child." So think about this right now. Like this, if you can't relate to this, then I think you haven't had a very normal Christmas experience. When I read this, it makes me think of the times when Tracy and I, we do ministry in Utah. We moved to Utah 25 years ago to plant a church, to do ministry, to reach Mormons. And when our kids were little, we would go home every Christmas. It was so stressful. We would go home every Christmas to spend time with the family, 1,400 miles away. There were seasons where Tracy made that trip pregnant. There were seasons when we made that trip with small kids in tow. The point is, most of us can relate to Joseph and Mary making this trip to Bethlehem in Judea. Now, I mean, to be honest, how excited could they be to have to be forced by the government to make this trip? So at least for some of us at Christmas time, we get excited when we travel home. I know that's not true for everybody. I think there's probably a mixture of emotions, but I can't even imagine that Joseph and Mary were excited in the least for this trip. It was more of an obligation than anything else. So there they are, traveling to Bethlehem from Nazareth in Galilee, and Mary was uncomfortable and pregnant. I wonder for you, moms and dads, this is a good question to ask, a fun little family question to ask. Who was more stressed in traveling at Christmas time, or just traveling in general? Was mom more stressed or was dad more stressed? I think we've had this conversation with our family over the years. And I think we both Tracy and I both get stressed, but I think she maybe wins the prize. She would get a little bit more stressed than I would. Now, I know that part of the reason some of you moms listening to this are rolling your eyes, because I know what you're thinking is because she had to plan more, she had to organize more, she had a lot more on her plate. Okay, that might be true. That might be true in our particular situation. But all I know is we both would get pretty stressed traveling at Christmas time. And I think it's important to read that into the story, to think about this for Joseph and Mary. She's very pregnant, worst time to travel. They had to both be pretty stressed out. And then we read on, verse 6. "While they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no lodging available for them." And there's that part. Here we go. Because there was no lodging available for them. Now, this is the NLT, but let me read it in the ESV. The ESV says this: "Because there was no place for them in the inn." And this is probably conjuring up memories where, we think about the Christmas story, and you have this innkeeper who is uncaring and busy and inattentive, and he's cranky because of the flood of people in Bethlehem because of this stupid census. I mean, it just makes me think of, traveling at the holiday season. The first Christmas had all those same elements. And so we all have this picture in our minds. I don't know, maybe I saw it like on the felt board in kids' church when I was a kid, or maybe I saw it in some movie somewhere, or that's on some meme somewhere, that you've got this innkeeper saying, there's no room here, and shooing them away. But the truth of the matter is the innkeeper isn't technically even in the story. Luke is the only gospel that even mentions this. And so all we really have here, and we've kind of blown this out of proportion, maybe, all we really have here is that there was no room for them in the inn. So it conjures up this idea that there's this innkeeper that just really missed out on this blessing. Now, let me read something from the Pillar New Testament commentary so that we have the right idea here, the right background here. Because as I began to study this for today's episode, this really opened my eyes. It's a little bit of a different scenario than what I thought of whenever I thought about Jesus being born in a manger. The commentary says this, that because there was no room for him in the inn, which is the King James, how the King James reads as well, this is indelibly etched in the Christian vernacular, but it's actually misleading. The commentary goes on to say that the Greek word, the word is katalima, does not refer to an inn or hotel. That's actually a different Greek word. Like, for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:34, literally the word in Greek there is the right word for inn or hotel. It's a different word that we see here in Luke chapter 2. Anyway, the commentary goes on to say that archaeology has helped define this word, katalima, properly as a guest room. That's what the NIV reads. It's a guest room. So the footprint of a typical first century Palestine dwelling was a rectangle divided into three spaces. So think about this. This is probably where they would have approached, Joseph and Mary would have approached when they got to Bethlehem. They would have approached this room, this dwelling, this house. You know, today we have all different types and styles of houses, but most homes back then would have been just one big rectangle divided into three spaces. So get that in your mind. A large room in the center with a stable for animals on one end and a guest room, katalima, on the other end. So all three rooms normally had separate entrances. The katalima was an attached guest room separated from the central room by a solid wall. The stable was separated from the central room by a half wall, so that allowed the family to feed the animals without going outdoors. So the commentator goes on to say this: when Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, the guest rooms in homes were already occupied, and hence the newborn Jesus was swaddled and placed in a manger in the stable, right? In the other room on the opposite side of that central main living space. So I don't know, when I read that description, it sounds more like an attached garage, or maybe even it sounds like an RV in the driveway, if you've ever seen the movie Christmas Vacation. So if this is the correct meaning of the word in Luke 2, then the innkeeper, think about this, the innkeeper may have actually been a relative of Joseph. Because remember, Joseph and Mary, they're traveling to Bethlehem. This is where his ancestors are from. That's why he's going there during the census. But the relative probably had other people he was hosting because of the census. And so he told them, hey, there's no room in this katalima. There's no room in the guest room for you, the furnished, comfortable part of the home. But there's room over here in the stable, which was still sort of connected to the whole facility. And you're going to have to go there and hang out with the animals. Now, I don't know if that changes your picture of this whole nativity scene, but it does for me, for sure. And what I want to do in today's lesson is I want to just take a few moments to think about the lesson we can learn from the innkeeper. Because here's a guy, zoom out and think about this. Here's a guy who had an opportunity to make room for the Savior of the world, but he didn't realize what he was missing out on. Let me say that again, because I want that to land for you today. Here's a guy who had an opportunity to make room for the Savior of the world, but he didn't realize what he was missing out on. If the innkeeper knew who Jesus was, who this baby that Mary was carrying, if the innkeeper knew who Jesus was, don't you think he would have kicked out whoever was in the guest room and he would have made room for Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus? I don't think that his problem was willingness. I really don't. I'm cutting this guy some slack. I don't think his problem was willingness. I think his problem was awareness. And I think the same thing can be true for us today. I think that so many more people would be willing to make room for Jesus in their life today if they really were aware of his identity and his power and his heart toward us. I think there are so many people in the world today who just get too busy for Jesus, not just at Christmas time, but they get too busy for Jesus throughout their year and then throughout the decades. And pretty soon they get to the end of their life and they haven't made any room for Jesus in their life. And I think if they knew who Jesus really was and what Jesus can bring to the table, I think there's no question that they would make room in their life for Jesus. And so with that in mind, I want to just ask 3 questions today so that we can apply the lessons from the innkeeper to our lives today. And these questions are all about making room for Jesus. Number 1, are you making room for Jesus in your schedule? Think about what you do with your time. Sports, entertainment, Netflix, watching your shows, watching sports on TV, kids' activities if you're parents, time with your friends, time to read, time to check Facebook and your other social media stuff. This time of year, Christmas parties and even stuff that we do at church. A lot of times we some of you listeners busy yourself with so many church activities, and that's a good thing. I mean, all these things are good things. But the truth is that sometimes in our schedule, we get so overburdened and overwhelmed that we're not making room for Jesus in our lives. It reminds me of the story later on in Luke chapter 10, verse 39, the story of Mary and Martha. Jesus comes over to their house, and it says that Martha's sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing because he was a guest. This is grown-up Jesus now, not baby Jesus anymore. Martha's not going to make the mistake that the innkeeper made. She is making this big dinner, preparing this dinner for Jesus, and then she comes to Jesus and she says this, and some of you can relate to this. Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. Because Martha was a doer. I bet you her love language was acts of service. So she's loving Jesus by serving him. And Mary's love language was probably quality time. And so Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, just spending time with him, listening to him. And Mary's distracted making the dinner. Martha's distracted making the dinner. And I know what all you Marthas are saying out there right now. You Marthas are saying, well, somebody had to make the dinner. If Martha sat like Mary did, then they'd have to, get McDonald's or something like that. But look at that's not how Jesus responded. Look at what Jesus said to her. Verse 41. Jesus said, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Here's what Jesus is telling Martha. Don't get so busy doing stuff in your 24-hour day that you're not making room just to be with Jesus in your schedule. And that lesson is still valuable for us today. Some of you are Marthas and some of you are Marys. And so I want to just speak to the Marthas for a second. And I want to give you, I'm just going to call it a 10-minute challenge. Here's your challenge. I want to challenge you to wake up 10 minutes early for the next 30 days, maybe the next 31 days, okay? 10 minutes early so that you can make room for Jesus in your schedule. Now, not all of you need to do this, but some of you maybe have never done this before. And so instead of telling you, hey, do this for a full hour, I'm giving you a simple little 10-minute challenge. Spend 5 minutes in the Bible. Maybe you could read a proverb a day, right? So the 31 Proverbs. So read a proverb a day for the next 31 days. You could easily do that in 5 minutes. And then spend 5 minutes in prayer and thanksgiving. Now, again, if this is something that you've never made room for in your life before, this might be 10 minutes might seem like a lot of time, but I promise you it's going to be easier than you think when you spend 5 minutes in prayer and thanksgiving. Spend some time thanking God for what he's done in your life. Make a list. Maybe this is a good time to start a journal if you've never done this before. I think that this 10-minute challenge that you can start right now in the month of December can become a regular habit for you that you can carry into the new year. And I think if you would make room for Jesus in your schedule, it'll change your life. All right, that's the first thing. Here's my second of 3 questions. Are you making room for Jesus in your traditions? Okay, this is probably a little bit more of a family question. So think about the typical things we do at Christmas time. You decorate, you probably drive around to see the lights. Maybe some of you do the elf on a shelf thing where you hide the elf and the kids get to find it. Maybe you do Christmas stockings. We do that too. This year is kind of fun for us because we added another stocking this year. Our daughter got engaged, and so we added a stocking for Luke on the mantle. That was fun for us. We look forward to someday we'll be able to add one when our son AJ has that special woman in his life that is coming soon, hopefully down the road. So that's a fun little Christmas tradition for us as a family. Obviously, most of us have the tradition of giving gifts. Some families do it on Christmas Eve. Some families do it on Christmas Day. We have kind of a special tradition that we have in our family. We call it the present hawk. If the gift is too big to wrap, we have just we give like a little small gift that they unwrap, and it's got a note in it, and it just usually has a cheesy rhyme in there, and it says, "Ask the present hawk to go get you your present." So those are just some of the Christmas traditions that we have. Obviously, one of the big Christmas traditions is to watch Christmas movies. I've got a listing in the show notes if you want to look at all the Christmas movies. I wonder which ones you've seen. Hopefully you've seen most of these. It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, The Grinch, A Christmas Story, Christmas Vacation, Home Alone, Elf, Polar Express, lots of great Christmas stories. That's a fun tradition for most families at Christmas time. And all these family traditions are wonderful. I think it's great to have special family traditions that your kids can grow up with. But here's where I want to challenge you to add something new to your family tradition. I want to challenge you to be more intentional about bringing Jesus into your family. Moses talked about this in Deuteronomy 6 when he's talking to the parents and the grandparents before they went into the promised land to establish their society and build their own homes and have vineyards and all that stuff. He kind of gives them a pep talk before they enter the promised land. He says, you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. What he's talking about here is family traditions that are centered on God. So many of those family traditions that I just mentioned are wonderful traditions, fun traditions, but so many families, it's kind of like the Innkeeper. It's not like you're not willing to have a God-centered tradition. It's like you're just not even aware of it. You're not thinking about bringing Jesus into your traditions. And this is what I want to challenge you to do. Make room for Jesus in your traditions. And for some of you, that might mean starting a new tradition this year. Let me give you a few ideas that we've used in our family. 2 of them are for those who have kids at home, and one of them is for anyone who wants to do this. So first of all, years ago when our kids were really little, we would do a nativity reenactment. It was so fun. We would dress the kids up like Mary and Joseph and whatever else, shepherds, some of the characters we're going to be talking about in this series. And then Tracy's mom would read the Christmas story and the kids would act it out. We actually have this in our family videos now. It was the cutest thing. It was so fun. Now, sadly, our kids are too big now to do this, so we don't do this tradition anymore, but we're looking forward to the day down the road when we have grandkids and we can do the same thing. A simple way to bring Jesus into the traditions at Christmas. Another thing that we did when the kids were a little bit older, probably in grade school, is we did an Advent calendar. Now, I didn't grow up in my family doing Advent calendars, but we said, let's try this thing. We bought an Advent calendar. If you've never done that before, it just gives you a little devotional to do every single day, and it kind of tells the story of Christmas for the weeks leading up to Christmas. A great way to bring Jesus into Christmas. And the last idea, and this is one that we still do, and I love it. It's beautiful. It's one of the highlights of our year as a family, And we've been doing it for years with our kids, and we still do it now that our kids are adults. And it's the Christmas prayer circle. We come together, we do this right before we open our presents. We come together, we circle up as a family, and we all take turns going around the circle, and we pray and we thank God for what he's done in the year. It's just a special emotional time of prayer that allows us to connect together and really make sure that we're putting Jesus at the center of this whole thing. I mean, we do this before we open the gifts because we recognize that the greatest gift is Jesus, that he is the greatest gift. And we recognize then the next greatest gift is the family that we have and the love that we have for each other and the ability to look back on the year and be grateful for what Jesus has done for us through the ups and downs of that particular year. That's the Christmas prayer circle. And it is always just a powerful time of prayer, except for maybe this last year when by the time it came around to me, I actually had ChatGPT write a Christmas prayer for me. And I kind of got in the doghouse after that because I read everyone else had their eyes closed. And then when it was my turn, I read this really formal, cheesy AI prayer. I did it as a joke, but anyway, it didn't go over so well. So I don't recommend that. I recommend a real prayer that you pray together and incorporate this, one of these traditions, or maybe there's some other traditions that you can be intentional about including in your traditions this year so that you're not acting like the innkeeper who certainly was willing. He just was kind of unaware. All right. One last question for today. And here it is. Are you making room for Jesus in your budget? Because I think this is another one of those things where I don't know that it's so much a problem of willingness as much as it's a problem of awareness. We're at the end of the year. It's a good time to be thinking about giving and generosity. It's one of the themes this time of year. And it's not just for tax deduction reasons. It's just because Christmas time is a time of giving, right? This is when people are generous. In fact, in our church, typically 25% of our giving for the year comes in the month of December. I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. But I want to end this by bringing some awareness to you as listeners. I don't know if you realize that at a typical church, and I'll speak for my church in particular, in our church, 20% of the people do like 95% of the heavy lifting in terms of giving for the year. There are some families, and I want you to hear this. There are some families who are really good at giving. It's something that they have an awareness of. It's a tradition, and I really think of this as like almost like a family tradition, making room for Jesus in your budget. This is a tradition where many families give generously on a regular basis to their local church, to organizations like Pursue God, to missionaries, things like that. Many families who give generously to that. And I'm talking about, I want you to think about this. I'm talking about 5%, 10%, 15% of what they make on a monthly basis. Now, the number of people who do that over the years is just slowly dwindling. And I bring this up because I want to challenge you. If you're listening to this, I want to challenge you. Maybe you didn't grow up in a family like that. You didn't grow up in a family where you gave generously, like regularly to church or regularly to, missionaries that you supported or whatever. And I think that's actually a problem. I think not making room for Jesus in your budget is a problem. Jesus said, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now think about what that means. That means that what you invest in, you'll fall in love with. And I think this is really important to think about. If you're not paying attention, you're going to end up falling in love with something that's not worthy of your love and adoration. You're going to fall in love with your house. You're going to fall in love with your retirement. You're going to fall in love with your car, the car that you drive, the vacations that you take. These things aren't bad things. But if these things become ultimate things, then what we've done is we've boxed Jesus out of our lives in this area. And I don't think it's necessarily because we're unwilling to be generous. I think it's more that we're not aware of what can happen when we're not generous. So wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That means invest in the kingdom of God. So I want to give you a challenge today. This comes from 2 Corinthians 8:12. It says, Whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly, and give according to what you have, not according to what you don't have. So I want to challenge two groups of people to step up their giving today. And I hope you keep listening all the way through this. I know that sometimes it can be uncomfortable when you're being challenged when it comes to your budget. But here's my challenge. For those with tight budgets, I really challenge you to establish the discipline of giving a small amount monthly. Look, I get it. If there's not a lot of room in your budget to give a lot, then just give a little. Be disciplined. Give $5 or $10 a month, even if money is tight right now. If you don't have a discipline like this, then I think it's hard for you to grow in your giving, and it's easy then for you to fall in love with the things that your money goes toward. It's not just rich people that can idolize money and material wealth. Poor people have just as big of a problem at that. So if your budget is tight, I just encourage you to step up your giving just a little bit. Now, here's the second group of people I want to speak to. It's for those who have been blessed. Some of you are doing well. For some of you, money's not a problem. You've got tons of money in savings. You've got your retirement stored up for all this stuff. That's awesome. Praise God for that. Thank the Lord that He's blessed you. And here's my challenge to you. I want to challenge you to be generous. I want to challenge you to establish the discipline of being generous with your monthly giving. Like not just a little bit, but I'm going to step out on a limb and say, I think you should think about giving hundreds, maybe even for some of you, you can afford to give thousands a month. And again, the reason I think it's important to do that is so that your stuff doesn't have a hold on your heart, so that you can participate in blessing your home church and blessing maybe missionaries. Maybe you're going to decide to give to PursueGOD.org. You will be, this is how I feel, you will be so glad that you gave. There are so many places in your life, things that you've bought that you regret making that purchase, but I've never once regretted giving to my local church or giving to Pursue God. And again, Tracy and I, we are those who are generous. We feel like we've been blessed. Now we don't make more money than most of the people that we know, but we're huge givers, and we're so glad that we are. We feel blessed to be able to give back to God. And I think the reason that we do it, honestly, the reason that we do it is because we do have an awareness of the need, because we are in ministry, because we run a church, because we run PursueGOD.org. We don't just have the willingness to do it. We have something that the Innkeeper didn't have. We have an awareness of the need, an awareness of the blessing that it brings to people. And that's what I hope some of you can have as you're listening today. I hope you are aware of who Jesus is and of the blessing that He can bring into your life. I hope that you're not like the Innkeeper who turned Him away, who didn't recognize what He was doing. He didn't recognize the gravity of the moment. And so He didn't make room for Jesus in that guest room. He only made room in the stable. I hope you don't make that same mistake. I want to close with a verse from the last book of the Bible, Revelation. In chapter 3, verse 20, Jesus says this: "Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends." I hope this year, as Christmas is approaching, as you make room for family and friends and fun activities this year, I hope you'll open the door to Jesus and make room for Him in your schedule, in your traditions, even in your budget. Because I really believe that if you do that, you will be so blessed.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to give to help support our ministry, please visit PursueGOD.org/donate. Find more resources to talk about these topics with your small group, family, or mentor on PursueGOD.org.